10 bullets. That's how many shots one police officer fired at a fellow cop here at this intersection back in 2018. Tonight, the story behind this strange shooting and how it highlights the failures in Canada to police the police. I'm Mark Kelley. This is The Fifth Estate. Pelham, Ontario, an hour and a half from Toronto, a place where not much happens, and according to Robin Zavitz, the locals like it that way.
It's a very quiet rural community. Most neighbors don't even know neighbors' names. If you come out here, you obviously want your privacy and you want to be someplace quiet, and that's what it is. There's a lot of farmland here, but there's also a lot of people that just don't want to be in the city, and they want to come out here for peace and quiet.
But one November day in 2018, she saw a cluster of Niagara Regional Police officers. They were investigating the scene of a traffic accident that had happened weeks earlier. Zavitz said something seemed unusual.
From that blockade on the road, we could see this intersection, and the intersection was full of police vehicles. Lights were going, and there was one police vehicle that appeared to have driven off the road slightly and was in the ditch.
Did you ask to find out what was going on?
We couldn't get down this far. We didn't find out what was going on until we'd been home for a while. And at that point, we heard through the grapevine sort of that there had been a shooting here in Pelham on the corner.
The first call that came through was a tip from one of our usual sources who said just that an officer had been shot. And that immediately sets off the newsroom.
LaFlèche was immediately assigned to cover the story.
I started working my police sources from the newsroom because our primary goal at that point was to find out who has been shot, what were the circumstances under which they were shot, and what's the condition of the officer. Because an officer getting shot in the line of duty is such a rare occurrence in Canada that when it happens, it's very shocking.
Family members were calling us and saying, "Oh my God, there's a shooting on Roland Road. Are you guys okay? What happened?" We said, "We don't know."
News quickly broke. This police shooting was unlike any other before.
As you know, there was an interaction and subsequent shooting of one of our constables by another member of our service. At this time, the investigation is in the hands of the Special Investigations Unit.
We learned that it was a police officer that had shot a police officer. So that was really cause for concern. There wasn't a lot of information out there other than one officer had shot another in broad daylight.
In a quiet little community.
In a quiet little community in the middle of the day while investigating a motor vehicle accident. So,
that's the stuff of that they make movies about.
That's right, it's very odd.
4 months later, Ontario's Special Investigations Unit, the Civilian Police Oversight Agency, laid multiple charges.
I'm here to advise you that the Ontario Special Investigations Unit charged one of our officers, Detective Sergeant Shane Donovan, earlier today. Shane was involved in an incident that has been widely reported in the media. Those offenses are attempted murder, aggravated assault, and assault with a weapon.
Donovan, a 19-year veteran of the Niagara Police, had an unblemished service record. So why shoot a fellow officer?
As I'm sure the community can understand, this incident and the last few months have been incredibly difficult and trying for the officers involved, for their families, and for our entire service. What I can tell you is there's no playbook for a situation like this.
No playbook and no precedent for a cop-on-cop shooting. Donovan allegedly shot his fellow officer 10 times, and somehow the victim survived. The Ontario Provincial Police was also called in to launch a criminal investigation.
And at that point, you just think, what? How? How is that going on? You know, whatever other criticisms you want to lay at the police service, they do stick together pretty well. Mm-hmm. It was a very shocking sort of incident because it just doesn't happen. It happens in the movies, it doesn't happen in real life. What the hell happened.
But the OPP investigation into the shooting would turn the case on its head. They alleged Donovan, the shooter, was in fact the victim in this incident, charging instead the cop he shot 10 times.
At approximately 9:40 a.m., the Ontario Provincial Police arrested and charged one of our officers, Constable Nathan Parker.
Donovan's charges would be dropped. Instead, Constable Parker was charged with assault with a weapon, and assaulting a peace officer. Parker's a 28-year veteran of the Niagara Police Force, but for those who knew him, this bizarre shooting was now starting to make a whole lot more sense.
Once we found out that a cop had shot a cop, that's when I turned to one of my colleagues and said, does anybody want to take bets that Nathan Parker's involved in this?
And I was just bored scanning the headlines for current events, and I came across Niagara Region police officer shoots fellow cop. I just saw that headline and I thought, here we go. He's finally gone too far. And so I clicked on the story and I wasn't even reading it. I just started scrolling down looking for his name. As soon as I saw Nathan Parker, I went, bingo! Because of course it was him.
When we come back, we take a closer look at Nathan Parker and his troubled past.
If your brother were to knock on your front door, what would you do?
Oh boy. I'm on the 3rd floor, so I can't jump out the window. I'd call police.
It was an unlikely setting for an unlikely incident. November 2018, Niagara Regional Police Officer Shane Donovan shot his fellow officer 10 times. The victim? Constable Nathan Parker. And yet Parker is the one charged after the shooting. We set out to find out more about Nathan Parker. He joined the Niagara Regional Police in 1990, fresh out of police college.
I attended his graduation at the Ontario Police College, and that was a joyous occasion. Our grandfather was there. He was a veteran of the Second World War. He exchanged hats with my brother. He put his grandpa hat with my brother in his uniform, and he took my brother's service cap on and posed for a picture, and that was a really warm moment.
Parker is now estranged from his only sibling, his brother Phil.
Tell me something about growing up with Nathan. What was it like? What was your relationship like growing up?
To tell you the truth, I didn't have a male role model. We didn't have a father. So he was he was my older brother, but he was sort of like, I didn't have a yardstick on how to judge how was I supposed to be a man, how was I supposed to be a male. So I looked to his example. I admired him. I tried to emulate him. But at the same time, there was also fear, because whenever he became angry, he was vicious. He's not raging 24/7. He can be humorous and you know, just have the characteristics of any well-adjusted person, and then he'll become angry, and it's disturbing.
And why did he want to become a cop?
I guess he was just naturally attracted to it. I guess he was drawn, just born for it. He certainly was driven. We were both skinny, but he turned to weight training to build himself up, and I think that wasn't just for athleticism. I think that was for the purpose of becoming a police officer, to, you know, become powerful and intimidate or overpower people who are resisting.
That brings us to this couple, Wayne and Marlene Penner. In 2003, Marlene was pulled over for not properly displaying her license plate. The police officer? Nathan Parker. Her husband Wayne was known to Niagara police after 2 criminal convictions of his own. He sat with his wife in traffic court.
Parker had spelled the license plate wrong, and this brought up a whole bunch of laughter in the courtroom, and so obviously I laughed too. He left the bench and he came down, and he came up to me and he says, "If you even look at me or say anything in the courtroom, I'm going to arrest you." I said, "Fine." So as soon as he sat down, I stood up and I said, "Your Honor," And I've just been threatened by a police officer that he was going to arrest me if I said anything or looked at him. And the judge says, no, you're not going anywhere, just sit down. So as I sat down, the next thing I remember was I was put in a chokehold behind from Parker.
So I get this straight. He's putting you in a chokehold in the middle of a busy courtroom?
Yes, the judge just left. And he dragged me with my glasses. My glasses went flying. And he dragged me out through the doors, the double doors that are the entrance into the courthouse. Punching my ribs, punching my shoulders, punching my head.
Marlene saw her husband loaded into the police cruiser, charged with causing a disturbance.
Tell me what you saw.
Well, I saw him a mess, his eye, and he was pretty beat up.
What's your impression of Officer Parker?
I would not want to meet him in a dark alley. I wouldn't wish that on anyone. He scares me, quite frankly.
The charge against Penner was dropped. He then filed a complaint with Niagara Police against Parker. A retired cop heard the case at a disciplinary hearing and didn't believe everything Penner was saying. He determined Penner had been disruptive in court, muttering profanities, and that officers acted legally in arresting him. He found Parker not guilty.
So what he's saying is you can actually choke a guy, beat him to a pulp in handcuffs, choke him, boot him, kick him. It's all legal. No problem. Canadian law. According to him.
Penner appealed and won. Then Niagara Police appealed and won. So Penner filed a civil suit. It took years to wind its way through a series of legal challenges. It was eventually settled out of court. Parker's next incident, though, was more clear-cut. Just 3 days after he was given use of force training, Parker assaulted a 16-year-old robbery suspect.
The teenager had said something, said, yo, like, what's up, G? Like he was pretending to be a tough guy. Parker did not like the term yo. It was like Rocky Balboa said yo, and he didn't like it. Kid was arrested, handcuffed, thrown on the ground, thrown in a police cruiser, and then pepper sprayed. And then, according to that teenager's account, while he's sitting in the car being pepper sprayed, handcuffed, Parker says to him, and you forgive the salty language, are you gonna say yo to me again, you piece of shit? This is somebody who's supposed to serve and protect.
The teenager filed a complaint, and Parker was charged with use of unnecessary force. The police hearing officer upheld the charge, adding, I am of the belief this officer has an anger management problem and needs to be brought under control. Parker was docked 7 vacation days and ordered to take an anger management course.
It's just so frustrating because he assaults people on the job. If I went to my workplace and assaulted someone, of course, I would immediately be fired and face criminal charges. So why should there be a double standard for police? That would be such a great deterrent.
But lawyer Margaret Hoy says the deterrents aren't there. She's taken on 100 cases for clients who've had run-ins with Niagara Regional Police, including Shane Donovan.
Let's stick with the internal police discipline system here for the Niagara Regional Police. How effective has that been as you've seen it over the years?
They're not, it's not working. So I'm seeing the same frequent flyers come across my desk on a regular basis.
Frequent flyers?
Yeah, those are individuals that I see involved in, police officers that I see involved in repeated assaults.
Was Nathan Parker one of those?
He would be an individual that I've seen before. I've seen on more than one occasion before.
One of those cases involved a cyclist named Pino Carbonara.
I believe that Mr. Parker had cut Pino off with his car, and I think Pino either swore at him or maybe he gave him a finger. And that can get you beat up in Niagara in certain neighborhoods.
And that's what happened to him?
Yeah.
Parker, who was off duty at the time, threw the cyclist to the ground, then arrested him for mischief, claiming he'd damaged his car. That charge was dropped. Carbonara filed a complaint. The police disciplinary hearing ruled in the cyclist's favor, saying Parker acted with a total lack of professionalism, judgment, and courtesy, adding, A strong message must be sent to this officer so that we as an organization and the public at large maintain the high trust and accountability that the public demands of its police officers. Niagara Regional Police docked him 90 hours leave time and sent Parker for retraining. In all, we found 3 incidents where Parker was found guilty by Niagara's disciplinary process for using unnecessary force during arrests. But to what end?
I don't ever remember hearing one police inspector or superintendent of these hearings saying, you know what, Officer X needs to go. This is an action that is so far past their public trust that we want to take this person's badge and gun. It doesn't happen. When it comes to the specific issue of police discipline and police disciplinary hearings, they keep kind of kicking themselves in the shin. And the case that you're looking at, the Nathan Parker case, is precisely one of those examples that I don't think the service has calculated the damage to its reputation long term.
This isn't just a problem for the Niagara Police. All across Canada, unless a death or permanent injury is involved, most police misconduct cases are investigated by internal disciplinary boards in secret. The police investigating the police. Margaret Hoy wonders where's the accountability, especially when dealing with those so-called frequent flyers.
As far as I know, they get very light. If any punishment, they get very light punishment. The system doesn't seem to correct their behavior. There may be things that they need to be looking at better, such as psychological assessments, to see if the individual has a temperament that is such that they should be a police officer. More often than not, when I'm doing these trials, I've found, oh yes, that was the high school bully, and he's now a police officer. One would have thought that the board or the police chief or whoever is in charge of that would actually investigate and reprimand them, but very little happened to these individuals, which were found to be culpable for assaulting individuals without cause.
What message do you think that sends to the police officers?
It's obviously a message that doesn't matter. Do what you want.
Who should ultimately be responsible for this? I mean, clearly there was a problem there, and clearly the problem needed to be solved. And it wasn't. Who should have taken action?
It seems to be a systemic problem. Come on. Get people, weed them out of police service. They don't belong. I don't know, I guess their hands are tied. Their hands shouldn't be tied. I think that's an excuse. Come on, police chiefs. You got power, you got authority. Stand up. Do something. Change the system. You're the ones in charge. You're not a bunch of passive observers. You're the ones in charge. Change it.
Niagara emergency.
Police, please, right away.
What is your emergency?
Altercation on the road here. He grabbed him by the head. He claims he was an officer.
Okay.
There's no way an officer would grab a guy by the head like that.
November 2013, a busy intersection in St. Catharines, Ontario. In a textbook road rage incident, an agitated man gets out of his vehicle to confront the driver of another car.
Niagara emergency, need police, fire, or ambulance.
2 witnesses would call 911.
I think police major battle here. 2 guys. I don't know the particulars.
Can you give me some information?
And he's trying to pull them out of the truck as we speak.
One of the males is trying to pull someone else out of the truck?
Yeah, as we speak right now. Excuse me, sir, if you're a police officer, you're totally out of line. Am I? Yes, you am I.
The off-duty police officer who was confronting him, Nathan Parker.
And now he's pushing me. Get out of the road. He's pushing me. Get out of the road. He's pushing me. Get out of the road. Oh, I'm not, sir. You get out of the road. Get out of the road. Go. Hello?
Hello?
Yes, hello. The police officer just assaulted me.
There's little known publicly about the other people involved in that incident with Parker. Well, we tracked them down.
I was traveling on Lake Street, and I came to a red light stop, and the truck beside me came to a skidding stop beside me. And then next thing I heard a lot of screaming, a lot of effing, all that kind of stuff. I got out of my car, I called 911 right away.
You want the license numbers?
Hang on 1 second.
There was a gentleman at the window of the truck, and he was extremely irate. Unfortunately, the guy in the truck made the mistake of putting the window down enough that he could get his hands in. And he was attempting to pull him out of there, and I would say by the ears. That's when I told him, like, look, slow down, back off, you know, let him go. And that's when he let the guy go, and he looked at me with this crazy look, and he walked towards him. He didn't run, and he's kind of like this on my chest. And then all of a sudden, kaboom, he nailed me really good.
All right. Don, we'll just go a few things first.
Niagara Regional Police opened an investigation into Parker's road rage incident after the driver filed a complaint against Parker.
My name is Bud Rung. I'm a detective sergeant. I work out of the casino unit in Niagara Falls.
We obtained this video of the police interview. This is what the public doesn't see, how police investigate allegations of misconduct against one of their own.
Your name is Don Plato? Yes. Is it Donald? Yes. And can you just
watch how it begins.
What I read, if there was an offense committed, it would be dangerous driving. Okay.
The officer investigating the complaint against Parker suggests Plato may be the one at fault and could be charged.
So before I get any type of statement from you, I want you to be aware of the jeopardy that you may be facing. I'm not saying you are facing anything. Okay. But I want you just to be aware of that.
Plato tries to set the record straight, saying all he did was honk at Parker for cutting him off.
He crossed over 2 lanes, so I lay on the horn. He slams on the brakes. I can't go anywhere. I'm wedged like this. I don't know who he is. He comes out of the truck. He grabs me by the hair and ears and just like he's trying to pull me out of the truck.
Okay.
This man's a pretty big guy. And he started with profanity and swearing.
So as he grabs you, what is he saying to you?
Oh, he's just screaming and yelling like a madman.
Yeah.
And the scary thing was, if we would have been out in a dark neighborhood where there was no witnesses, I don't know where this guy would have stopped me.
At several points in the interview, the investigating officer says Niagara Police will take these complaints seriously.
We have what we call professional standards. It's kind of like you see on TV, the internal people. Yeah. I can't say to you, here, you come to court and you get up, because it's up to you. And if you're not interested in pursuing, I'm certainly not going to victimize you again and say you have to. It's up to you.
Plato eventually dropped his complaint against Parker, though Officer Rung told us later he didn't try to influence him in any way.
You know, they talk about policemen, you should be held to a higher standard, which I 100% agree with. And the criminal code doesn't look at stuff that way, but the Police Services Act does. So even things like swearing, right? Swearing in public, you can lose time, and if there is a history and severe offenses in the Police Service Act, ultimately you can lose your job. So
Parker didn't lose his job. He was docked 120 hours pay. This was his 4th disciplinary offense, 3 of them involving violence, setting the stage for the shootout with Shane Donovan.
I have friends and relatives that are in the Niagara Police Department, and there are a lot of really good people there for sure. But unfortunately, like anywhere, there's always a few bad apples. And what I don't understand is when there is a bad apple, why is that bad apple still out there? Essentially, a police officer is a civil servant, I think, and they're being paid by us, taxpayers, to serve and protect. Well, I don't feel served or protected if you put a crazy guy like that back on the street with a badge and a gun.
The hearing officer in Parker's disciplinary tribunal said although there are deficiencies identified in his performance appraisals, he has earned the support and confidence of his immediate supervisors. So what is the solution for improving police discipline? Well, it's no secret. 4 years ago, the Ontario government launched a review of how different police agencies investigate cases of police misconduct. Lawyer Danielle Robitaille was senior counsel on the Tulloch Commission.
Justice Tulloch made the recommendation that within 5 years, there should be independent prosecution and adjudication of disciplinary matters.
For all of them. Mm-hmm. It should no longer be left in the hands of the police to police themselves.
It's too important. It's too important for public confidence. And, you know, it's a civilian police force. It relies on public confidence. We're here sitting in 2020 where there are calls to defund the police. It's a complete crisis of legitimacy.
What do you think of that idea that if somebody's got multiple infractions, disciplinary infractions, do you believe that they should be red flagged in a way?
You know, one of the ideas that was explored in Justice Tulloch's report was the idea of, you know, a college of policing where officers could be licensed, and there would be a way to revoke an officer's license so that they couldn't move to another service and start their career after a series of blemishes somewhere else. There should also be a central database where interested members of the public can research an officer to discover whether they've been convicted multiple times of infractions.
Why do you think that's important?
I don't see policing as being any different than any of the regulated health professions. You know, if you go see a registered massage therapist, a dentist, a doctor, an orthodontist, you can log on, input their name and address, and find out what their entire discipline history was. And police have more power, more authority, and are invested in the public interest in the same way that those medical professionals are.
I want to ask you about the case of Nathan Parker.
Yeah.
Is his case an example of the failure of the disciplinary process?
You could look at the case as a bit of a test case for a number of questions. You know, should Nathan Parker have been made an officer in the first place? Did he have the right disposition? Did he have the right training? Did he have the right mentorship? Was it the right culture at the Niagara Police Service? It's certainly a case that we're all watching with great interest.
The Tulloch report made 129 recommendations to improve the police disciplinary process and make police watchdogs more effective in policing the police.
Have you seen any movement towards what you and what Justice Tulloch were suggesting?
You know, I have to say that it's been a process that has been extremely disillusioning. The Ford government seems to be unwilling and resistant to take up these recommendations. You know, unfortunately, I've become a bit cynical about how these things work, and I am very sad to say that it appears it's been shelved.
Coming up, a look back at the fire and the fury that helped create the first police watchdog agency in Canada.
We're fed up with every time that there's an incident like this that the black community yells out and screams racism.
The use of dum-dum bullets in the killing of Wade Lawson made it no mere killing, but rather an execution. And it's clear that a charge should be laid, and that charge should be murder.
Toronto, 1988. It could have been yesterday. Black citizens marching in the streets demanding an end to police brutality and the beginning of police accountability. The protests triggered by the death of this man, Lester Donaldson. 5 Toronto police officers who said they were responding to a call from his home found the mentally ill and disabled man alone in his bedroom. After a scuffle, Constable David Deviney shot Donaldson point blank twice, claiming he'd lunged at his partner with a knife.
There are unconfirmed reports now that Donaldson was just waving a kitchen knife at the 5 officers.
Many in Toronto's growing black community took to the streets. Donaldson's death, one more case of police using deadly force.
Everything came up to a boiling point. People were really, really, really outraged that police were killing people. There was no consequence. In other words, the police always got away.
Constable Deviney was charged with manslaughter and acquitted. His lawyer argued that Deviney believed shooting Donaldson was necessary to protect his partner's life. 4 months after Donaldson's death, 17-year-old Wade Lawson was killed by Peel Regional Police Constable Anthony Melaragni. He and his partner Darren Longpre claimed Lawson was trying to run them down in a stolen car. They fired at the car. However, it was the rear window that was blown out. Lawson was killed by a shot in the back of his head with a banned hollowed-out bullet.
The use of dum-dum bullets in the killing of Wade Lawson made it no mere killing, but rather an execution. It's clear that a charge should be laid, and that charge should be murder.
Charges were indeed laid, but both officers were acquitted. Their lawyer argued the two officers feared for their lives and fired in self-defense. That sparked even more protests in Toronto, leading to the creation of a provincial task force into police accountability, or the lack of it.
And task force and policing made a recommendation that police forces be overseen by a civilian entity, because the concern prior to that police were investigating themselves. And the prevailing feeling was that could not be fair.
In 1990, the Special Investigations Unit was born in Ontario, the first of its kind in Canada. The civilian oversight agency would investigate incidents where people died or were seriously injured at the hands of police. There are now 7 provinces with civilian watchdog agencies. But according to the Canadian press, recent data reveals these agencies only recommend charges be laid against police officers in 3 to 9% of the cases they investigate. So why is it the vast majority of civilian watchdog investigations result in no charges being laid against police officers? To answer that, we brought together 4 former SIU directors who collectively ran the agency for most of its 30 years. Ian Scott, Howard Morton, Andre Marin, Tony Laparco. They've never sat down for an interview together until now.
As we speak today, it is almost the 30th anniversary of the creation of the SIU. But it was created, after the shooting deaths of Lester Donaldson and Wade Lawson. Right. A public outcry at the time. Right. People saying we need to do something better to police the police. And when you remember that from 1990, fast forward to 2020, has the SIU really accomplished those goals from the public's perception?
I think the lack of trust in marginalized communities has never been lower than it is now. And it's hard to understand why. I think it's part of the lack of faith in the criminal justice system in total. So the SIU gets its share of that.
But so one of the issues there, and certainly from a public perception, is when we look at the what is it, less than 3% of the cases end up being recommended for charges being laid.
I'll give you the answer. The police investigation is motivated by the allegation of criminal activity, serious injury or death. Mm-hmm. And we're talking police officers, so you wouldn't expect them to be killers. Like, to me, the fact we say it's 3% is irrelevant. That just means that, generally speaking, the system's working. But
that's not the public perception.
That's not the public perception.
The public perception is that it's not working.
And that's, to a certain degree, the SIU's fault, because we should be basically telling people, this is our mandate. We look into these incidents to see whether or not there are reasonable grounds to lay a criminal offense. The fact of the matter is, the vast majority of these cases where force is used is not criminal.
But Tony's right. I mean, the reality is we expect the police to enforce the law. We expect them to enforce it in a reasonable way, subject to the parameters that exist in the criminal code. And force is ugly when it's used, but there are many, many circumstances and where the force is reasonable and regrettably necessary.
I must have missed something, because what you say is true, but you're talking about a very narrow community, us included, that understands all that.
Yes.
What I'm talking about are the public, and particularly racialized and marginalized people. They just don't trust. And I say part of it stems from a lack of trust now in lawyers, judges, courts, the entire justice system. Right? And unless it's redefined in a way that the public understands it and feel they're a part of it, that trust ain't coming back.
The former directors say it's not just the public that doesn't trust the SIU. Many police chiefs don't either.
In the past, SIU directors, I think we all have done this, we would say in our director's report, in our press release, whatever, that there was reasonable force in the circumstances. However, police training sucked. They should be retrained, but then they go crazy. Chiefs of police will go crazy. That's not your job. Your job is to charge or not to charge. Right. Don't tell me how to train my officers. So they'd be extremely defensive instead of saying, yeah, it's a good point. Let's look into it and do a further investigation on how these people were trained. But, you know, the SIU is in a perfect position to assess that and say, without prejudging, why don't you guys have a look at whether these guys were properly trained to handle the situation?
And that brings us to the case of Nathan Parker and whether the police can truly be counted on to discipline their own.
There's going to be red flags around people that have disciplinary issues. I mean, there are a number of issues, obviously. The hiring is the first one. What we don't see on the SIU end of it is these sort of incremental disciplinary issues, which should put a red flag over somebody that this person's a problem.
Let me throw one more case at you. This is the Nathan Parker case, the officer out in Niagara Regional Police, who ends up being shot by a fellow officer.
I laid that charge too.
You laid that charge too?
Yeah.
And when we look at this officer's, the victim in the case, we look at
Well, it depends on who you see as the victim, because according to 720B, the person that I charged wasn't the, you know, he's the victim.
He's the victim.
That's according to what's happened since, because I laid the charge against the shooter.
What transpired there?
Well, you have to ask them. But the fact that I lay a charge and someone else withdraws it doesn't mean we always agree on whether it should have been withdrawn. And I wouldn't have laid the charge if I thought that it should have been withdrawn. That's still before the courts, so I really shouldn't comment when I think about when you're talking about Parker. But just because you have a history of disciplinary infractions doesn't mean that you know someone's justified in shooting you.
No, but it does make you wonder, what does it take to get rid of a bad cop?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is a great weakness in the system. It's not really an SIU issue.
No.
It's an internal disciplinary issue. But I agree with you. This is a big problem. You know, for example, officers can be suspended, as they are right now, with pay for sometimes over 10, 11, 12 years. And this is a great weakness of the system, in my view.
The former directors agree there's a steep price to pay if the public stops believing the police will be held accountable for misconduct.
Don't take it so easy. I'm very concerned about this city. We're only at the big marches and protests now.
Sure.
But if you get a rash of shootings of racialized people, we'll never go as far as the States, but you're going to see ransacking and fires.
Well, I hope not.
I hope not too.
Going back to a question that you asked much earlier about, you know, public trust in the SIU, can you take a couple steps back as a society and say, look, what is the SIU doing? It's kind of a safety valve when we have some of the absolutely worst things that can happen in a civil society, that being the death of our people, our citizens, by sworn officers. So how have we in Ontario responded to that? Well, since 1992, we haven't had a real riot. Look at the U.S. I mean, you know, they have so many riots down there, they can't keep up with them. Right. So, and I know in the U.S., I know they do not have very good accountability systems.
No, it's very...
And they pay as a society, they pay big time. And you know, the police should care about this issue, because look what happened was in Louisiana, where a grand jury, we don't have grand juries here, but the grand jury did not indict in the death of a young black woman.
Yeah.
2 police officers were shot after that. If you start to lose faith in the oversight agencies to that degree, you're just facilitating vigilantism. And this is not like an ethereal concept I'm talking about here. I'm talking about, you know, these are police officers getting shot.
Wild. Yeah. That was wild. And I mean, you know, knock on wood, Canada never goes down that road. But right. You're right. If there's a total loss in faith, that's where you start to head.
But lawyer Clayton Ruby says there is a total loss of faith in police oversight. To him, the SIU was and is an empty promise.
And I think everyone went in with high hopes, but it didn't work, and it didn't work horribly.
Why didn't it work, in your opinion?
I think because the message from government was, we're doing this to assuage public anger over a couple of killings or violent episodes, but our heart's not in it. What we really want is what we've always wanted. We want quiet.
Is that why you call it a fake organization?
It is a fake organization. It's designed to look like a real unit, but it is not. No, they never brought. This is silly. Stop pretending that we have a discipline system internally that works. It does not work.
But we see time and time again. I mean, there are officers who've had 3, 4, 5 disciplinary measures taken again against them, and yet they're sent right back out in the street with their gun and their badge.
That's right, and that's worse in the United States. You see the people with the highest number of complaints, forget acted on or not, 70, 80 complaints, and they're still in the street having a great time with a gun. No, it's irresponsible. But we do not govern the police. The police govern us.
So in the end, why did Shane Donovan shoot Nathan Parker on this road back in 2018? Well, it turns out it was all a matter of police discipline. In a sworn statement, Donovan says Parker left his post without permission during a crash investigation. When Parker returned, an argument broke out. Donovan says Parker punched him repeatedly. So Donovan then drew his service revolver. He says Parker did the same. Donovan shot him repeatedly, he says, fearing for his life. Donovan is now suing Niagara Regional Police and the police board for $2 million, claiming they failed to properly discipline Parker when they knew he was dangerous and violent, and for employing Parker when he was known to have an uncontrollable temper and abuse his authority to harm individuals. Parker's criminal trial is now set for September. Parker didn't respond to our multiple requests for an interview. However, his lawyer is quoted as saying, from the defense perspective, the wrong man, the victim, is going to trial.
At first I thought, oh.
Parker's brother Phil hopes the trial will finally put an end to his brother's career as a cop for the good of everyone.
He should have been fired. That would be wonderful if there is a positive outcome from this horrible tragedy. I'm really sorry for what Shane Donovan had to go through, because that must have been torture to be charged with a capital crime, the capital crime of surviving my brother. Anyone who knows my brother, anyone who has been a witness or the target of his violence, would automatically know that he would have been forced to act in self-defense. There was no question in my mind. This time, he picked the wrong victim. That bully picked a victim who knew how to defend himself.